you all for coming. It's a great pleasure to co-organize and co-host the event with my alma mater, American University of Beirut, as well as co-hosting with the American Task Force for Lebanon. Ambassador Gabriel and myself collude and collaborate on many things in this town. This was organized on the occasion of President Fadl al-Khouri's visit to the U.S. and to Washington, so we thought it would be a great opportunity to take advantage of that, to assemble a panel discussing American-style higher education in the Middle East, highlight 3 universities at least: the American University of Beirut, the Lebanese American University, and the American University of Cairo. And I will introduce our 3 panelists in a moment. Our discussion today will talk about sort of the trajectories, challenges, and so on of these 3 universities in these 2 challenging countries, Lebanon and Egypt, but also discuss how these institutions of higher education connect to global citizenship, global labor forces, global goals of that nature. We will talk about how U.S.-style higher education fits into U.S. foreign policy, U.S. aid policy, and we might also discuss the crisis or some of the crises of higher education in the United States and many of the tensions that we're seeing in many university campus, what that means for U.S. higher education in general, what it means particularly for U.S.-style higher education institutions in the region. This session will be about an hour and 15 minutes, so we'll go on till 1:30. I will initially engage with our panelists in a discussion on a number of issues that I've mentioned. Then we will turn it over to you for a Q&A session. I should mention that today is International Women's Day, and obviously the role of education for women that has been played by all these 3 universities. You see it in Egypt, you see it in Lebanon, you see it throughout the Middle East, has been transformative. The Lebanese American University in particular, as you know, used to be a women's college. So it particularly has had a century of work in that area. So let me introduce our 3 panelists. I myself am Paul Salem, head of this institute here. I did 1 year at AUB, not more. It was in the middle of the Civil War, but obviously something that I remember very well. My father was very much involved at AUB, so I consider myself kind of a child of AUB in that sense. My mother went to BUC at the time, LAU, so a lot of connections there as well. Dr. Fadl al-Khouri is currently the president of the American University of Beirut, has been so since 2015, so coming up to his full decade as a leader of AUB. He previously was professor and chairman of the Department of Hematology and Medical Oncology at Emory University School of Medicine, held the Roberto Goizueta. That's a tough word to
You don't
pronounce.
drink enough Coca-Cola, Paul.
I think so. Distinguished chair for cancer research. He's had an amazing career at AUB itself. Navigated first the very challenging situation of Lebanon and AUB from 2019 onwards, the economic collapse, fiscal, monetary, banking, and then the pandemic, the port blast. I mean, it really has been a very challenging period for all institutions in Lebanon, and Dr. Khouri really steered it in a brilliant way. Dr. Lisa Anderson is my former professor, former thesis advisor from many years ago at Harvard, but she served as the president of the American University in Cairo for 5 years, from 2011 to 2016, and prior to that she was the university's provost since 2008. She's currently a special lecturer and James Shotwell Professor of IR Emerita at the Columbia University School of International Public Affairs, and the Dean Emerita of the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia, where she led the school from 1997 to 2007. Great to have you with us, Lisa, and your experience at AUC, A shout out to our dear friend Dr. Ahmed Dalal, who is currently the president of AUC and doing a tremendous job there. And my friend and colleague, Ambassador Ed Gabriel, is with us. He wears two hats today. He is the president and CEO of the American Task Force for Lebanon, which is really the premier organization in the United States that brings together Lebanese Americans, works on U.S. policy towards Lebanon, visits Lebanon, and takes delegations to Lebanon very frequently. MEI and ATFL collaborate on a lot of these policy issues related to Lebanon. But his second hat, which is a very important one, is he's currently a member of the board of the Lebanese American University, which is celebrating its centenary this year, and as such, very much involved in higher education in the Levant. I would also say he's very involved in higher education and education in general in Morocco. Ed served as the U.S. ambassador to Morocco from 1997 to 2001, and he's the chair or co-chair of a lot of organizations and institutions in Morocco, as well as a member of the board of the United States Institute of Peace in D.C., Ahmed East, the Arab American National Museum, Arab American Institute, the Keystone Center, so very, very active. And Ed, great to have you with us, and great to have LAU with us as well. Also, a shout out to the current president of LAU, Dr. Michel Mawad, also navigated a very challenging situation between the collapse of 2019, Port Blast, COVID, and all of that. So all the best to all those serving presidents. Well, let's get into it, and maybe Dr. Khouri, I'll start with you. Situate us as how you see the role of an institution like AUB in the current environment that Lebanon and the Middle East is going through. What are the main missions? What are the main goals? And how is higher education, from the vantage point of AUB, being expressed?
So, thank you, Paul. First of all, I'd like to thank Lisa and Ed for also joining us today. Thank the Middle East Institute. Thank all of our mothers for putting up with us, et cetera. And on the occasion of International Women's Day, which it says something that we still need an International Women's Day, and I'll get into that. So AUB is in an interesting situation, which I see as a tremendous opportunity. Sometime around the 1990s, the American institutions of higher education in the US, which saw a dramatic growth in their endowments, not just from donors, but from the explosion in the tech and other sectors, saw a tremendous growth in their worth. And they made a decision, which maybe I'm being a little bit controversial here, to perhaps focus on education. Research became arguably the primary focus of the greatest universities here, and service, but they became, in my opinion, less mission-oriented, having served at several very good mission-oriented institutions, and they had the opportunity to play it safe. You don't have the opportunity to play it safe either at AUB or AUC or LAU, and your best defense for your institution is not how carefully you manage your endowment, as critical as that is, it's how closely you adhere to your mission. So AUB is the original mission-oriented institution in that part of the world, about half a century older than AUC, a little bit older than LAU. AUB's original mission was to convert people from, they were not so successful with your family, they were quite successful with all branches of my family, from Catholic or Orthodox or Maronite to Protestant, right? But after 1882, and I'll get to why I'm bringing up this context, when the university forced out Edwin Lewis for bringing up the work of Charles Darwin, and then lost all of their best Occidental faculty. And I mean, these are people who had written textbooks and translated everything in Arabic, were teaching in Arabic. They quickly shifted to a secular humanist approach, which saw the university renamed as the American University of Beirut in 1920, about the time near the founding of AUC. And Then by the late 60s, Bible study was gone and the chapel became Assembly Hall. So AUB has been a very, very mission-oriented institution. And as I've argued with boards at my previous institutions, the saying of no margin, no mission is nonsense. I mean, institutions' adherence to their mission creates the margin that people, be it students, donors, philanthropists, research agencies, give them. So I think in the last decade, AUB being more mission-oriented has presented a tremendous opportunity for us to not only transform the lives of the young people who parents trust us with, but to start to impact society more broadly. In my inauguration, I said I wanted to see AUB lower the gates and be more permeable from campus, be more permeable to society. So there's a tremendous opportunity to have impact on the society in Lebanon and the region, but it doesn't come without risk. The risk is, of course, you are now impacting some stakeholders who have other means than debate and discussion to answer you, and you are starting to get to an area of discomfort for some. So the opportunity for AUB, I think specifically, and I would argue also for AUC and LAU, is tremendous because at the end of the day, Lebanon, Egypt, Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, none of the countries are doing exceptionally well. And if you exclude these 6 Gulf countries, the rate of return of the youth is under 5%, as I wrote in my piece in the National. So it's hard to say we could be doing much worse. In Africa, that rate has gone from 9.5% sub-Saharan Africa to in the low single digits. It's much higher than that. And these are people who go abroad and then come back. And Lisa's written on this topic, John Waterbury's written on this topic. And just basically saying, we're giving you a great degree, go fix the country, it doesn't work because the opportunities are so much greater abroad. So I think the universities have to work together and work with civil society, with the governments, as unpalatable as that may be, with the various stakeholders to create opportunities, economic and social opportunities in the countries that we serve. We've been a great AAA factory, baseball term, for the great universities abroad. I mean, AUB ranks in the top 50 universities in the world in getting jobs for our graduates and in getting them into top graduate schools or medical schools or residency. But that's not enough anymore, given the dire state of societies. You have almost 600 million people between Iran, which none of us are allowed to touch right now, and Lebanon, including North Africa, who are in societies where their rights are not fairly administered. Imagine if we could reach those people as a group of high-quality universities and create opportunities for them to stay there. I would say that is the #1 opportunity for AUB and others.
Thank you, Dr. Khoury. Lisa, Dr. Anderson, let's go to you. You served at AUC in Cairo for a long time. I know you've followed events there since then. How do you see sort of the challenges, the goals that AUC sets for itself? How much is Egypt specific? How much is sort of global or regional in scope?
Well, once again, thank you for hosting all of us here and for what obviously we think is an important conversation. I agree entirely with the sort of focus on mission. And, Paul, as you were introducing us, you were talking about the various challenges we had navigated. One of the values of that is that you don't forget why you're there and what you're supposed to be doing. And I actually think that the challenges many American institutions are now having to navigate is partly because they did lose focus on it. So we can return to that, but I do think that none of us have ever been complacent about the importance of what we're doing and how we can best do it. So, again, I agree that AUC in Egypt, and to some lesser degree perhaps throughout the region, has for generations been producing the elite of the media scene, the political, so forth and so on. Most of the major businesses are AUC alumni and so forth and so on. So there's lots to be proud of, but that's not enough. That doesn't speak to the mission of the institutions like this now. I always say, apropos the sort of origin story of AUC started operating in 1919. That was the first Egyptian revolution. What do you mean Egyptian revolution? We know, and it's important that we keep that spirit, that we are not complacent. We are, we are continuing to sort of invest in this instance. Egypt is 110 million people. That's a lot to invest in right there. But I'll give you one example that I think illustrates what Adlo is talking about from an Egyptian perspective. One of the things that I'm very proud of that we did when I was there and has continued even more dramatically is, obviously, if we are able, as we are, to place our students in graduate programs, in employment, and so forth and so on, we sort of know how to do that. And as we know, in Egypt and most of the rest of the region, most recent graduates from universities are unemployed. So we've gone to all of the national universities in Egypt at this point and helped them develop career centers.
That's great.
That's the kind of
Basic
thing.
stuff.
Yeah, basic stuff that, if you have 250,000 students, it's sort of hard to think about how you do a career center. But we can say, all right, let's help Einshams build their career center and so forth and so on. So there are little things like that that are constantly part of AUC's sense of what it ought to be doing. Yes, of course, education is retail. It's one person at a time. But they're also having an impact as an institution is equally important. And I can't think of an American university that thinks of itself that way any longer. And I think they're just going to have to begin to think about the impact they're having more broadly than we have graduates.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Ambassador Gabriel, Ed, my good
Yes,
friend.
sir.
You're a board member of LAU, and you're also engaged, a lot of visits to Lebanon. Obviously, we'll get to the U.S. foreign policy a little bit later. How do you see LAU's role, LAU's trajectory in Lebanon, and maybe a bit in the region, because you also travel to the region a lot? How would you situate LAU in that sense?
Sure. First of all, thank you. It's a pleasure to serve with Lisa and Fudlo and you on this panel. And just in honor of International Women's Day, you mentioned LAU was founded as a women's university, and also it had the first women's study program in the region. So shout out to them. Look, the way I look at this is a little different, not being the head of a university, more of a Washington-focused person, but on the board of LAU and grappling with a lot of the current problems. To me, these universities are like an island in a very tumultuous sea, and they represent just what is best about American values, in my opinion, and American education. You've got some of the most, you got world-class institutions here. I know at least in LAU and AUB, and I'm sure AUC's case, they're in the top 5% of universities in the world. It's a great place to get an education. It also offers kind of a public square for conversation, which I think is really important for children. It has liberal values, American values, freedom of speech, how to be inclusive with students of other religions and colors, etc. It's also a bridge, I think, between the cultures in the Middle East and America, and I think that's really important as well. And of course, one of the missions that we should have is educating the youth. It's important, I think, for us to look at the youth. Well, they're going to be tomorrow's leaders. And is this going to be kind of a Chinese approach to education, which is illiberal, or will this be more of an American approach to addressing these? So I look at this as a great soft power opportunity for these universities, and to be sort of, they should be agreed to by our Congress as a soft power institution. I think it's really important because it addresses our interests as well as our values.
And we'll come back to the U.S. side, but thank you for those perspectives on LAU and universities like that in Lebanon and Cairo. Thank you, Ed, and if I may use first names, Lisa and Fadlo. Lisa, back to you. Obviously, you've been a leader at Columbia for a long time in New York, Columbia University, and you've been a leader at AUC. These are both, U.S. higher education institutions, obviously in different contexts. From where we are today, 2024, what is common about sort of challenges and opportunities in Columbia that would apply in a Cairo situation or Beirut, and what do you think is fundamentally different?
Well, the U.S. dollar hasn't plummeted, so the economic problems are very different. I mean, when I started at AUC, it was 5 pounds to the dollar, and it's now 50 pounds to the dollar. So, and that most of that has been.
We won't mention how much.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sounds pretty good to me.
So, I mean, to some extent, it is really apples and oranges, because whatever else the president of Columbia has to worry about, operating in different currencies in that way, so forth and so on, is just not. And I'm sure both of my colleagues will attest to the fact that that takes up a lot of the time and energy of the president, whether you like it or not. So that's certainly one thing. But I think when I think about the sort of experience at AUC, I'll give you one little example of how I think those of us in the positions we're in, really have something in a way to offer to our colleagues in the United States. I used to come back from Cairo to visit with other university presidents and so forth, and keep in mind I became president 24 days before the 25th of January, so it was a very tumultuous time.
No causal relationship.
Believe me.
Spoken like a political scientist.
Exactly, very much.
Connect the dots that don't exist.
But Ruth Simmons, who was then president of Brown University, said at one point that she didn't like to leave Providence more than, for about a week at a time because something might happen. And I said, something happens in Providence? So that sense that things happen, I think things are happening here in a way. This is what I was talking about, the complacency. And a sort of, no, you really do have to be paying attention. And for Brown, you have to pay attention to Providence and so forth and so on. These, in that sense, none of us are islands. All of us are in a context that we need to be thinking about. And I actually think we are a little bit more alert to that than some of our colleagues based here, who seem to think that they exist in a sort of, atmosphere. Really, very much so. But I'll give you one more anecdote, and then this does speak to, I think, some of the challenges here now. In the course of all of the upheavals that attended the demise of the Mubarak regime and the subsequent political journey, the students at AUC took over the campus and stopped classes and so forth and so on, as happened in every university in Egypt. So we had to figure out how we would address this, because classes had been suspended as a result, and being an American university, we all worried about contact hours and accreditation and all that sort of stuff. And so we had an emergency management team that met every morning, and we tried to figure out what to do. And every once in a while, somebody on the team would sort of, say, we have to call the police, we have to call the police. And I said at the time, American universities don't call the police onto campus. And we never did call the police. And we negotiated the end of the And I get back to the United States, and there are police on the campuses. And I thought, wait a minute,
What did I miss?
I thought we didn't do this. So I actually think in that sense as well, a lot of the kinds of ways that people have been thinking, we've lost focus in that way too. Sort of, what is the relationship with the students? What is the relationship with the communities that we're living with? You know, it has become so businesslike that this is sort of private property and we're going to have the security. And that's not what a university is about. So I do think that there are ways in which our experience really does speak to some of the challenges today in ways that I don't think people appreciate.
Very interesting. I mean, you mentioned, Fadlo, the history of about how AUB interacted with its environment and different shifts in culture. And speaking of the police, I remember when I was a student at AUB, the Beirut police from that Karakon Hbesh next door, they entered the university and they wanted to arrest Thomas Aquinas. This is true because Thomas Aquinas was being taught at the university, a medieval thinker, and he had said something about Islam, and they thought he was a professor. They wanted to arrest him. And they never did find him, but they tried. Fadlo, I mean, the title of this session is Global Citizenship, but let's start, you know, Lebanon went through a revolution, as did several, you know, at AUC as well. AUB students, you yourself, and others were part. I mean, everybody's a citizen also of the country they're in. How do you see the role of the university in building, let's call it first, national citizenship? There is an emerging Middle East, wouldn't call it a citizenship, but the Middle East itself is changing. You mentioned the Gulf. The Levant is in a terribly different condition. Maghreb is yet in another state. And then there's global citizenship. As the leader of AUB, putting aside, you know, the academics and the fundraising and the management and all of that, at the end of the day, it keeps you busy. You're shaping citizens, and you're shaping, you know, people in this country, in this region, in this world. How do you think of all of that?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think AUB has a deep tradition of this, which was very well enunciated by Daniel Bliss, and I'm paraphrasing when he said, we're not making men into doctors, men into engineers, men into lawyers. We're making doctors into men, lawyers into men, engineers into men. And I think AUB has a big responsibility. And part of that responsibility, and I think it's nice to see Jay and Jennifer sitting together because we work together. My first official trip, because, you know, Lebanon, as often happens, didn't have a president. Unlike the ambassadors, you can actually start your job without turning in your papers. So I went to the Speaker, the Prime Minister, and I made sure my first visit was to USG, LAU presidents, and then I went to see your father in Balaman. And I was sending a not subtle message, which is, yes, you're always going to have competition, but it's my job to worry about the higher education sector and to worry about LAU and USG and the other few universities that have some legitimacy. And why is that? One university is not going to be able to have the critical mass to create the citizen of the future, especially in a country like Lebanon, which personally I think its diversity is its towering strength, okay? You're exposed to so many people with slightly different backgrounds, not just religious, right? I mean, you have rural, urban, you've got tremendous, for such a small country, tremendous influences culturally from so many areas. So you need to make sure that it's not your opinion that comes out, it's the opinion of the university. You mentioned the Thawra, which I always called the uprising, not the revolution. I've never known anyone other than Gandhi to have a successful revolution and Mandela without spilling blood. And it was my hope that the Lebanese could achieve a reform, revolution, improvement. But, you know, I mean, 3 months and they were confused about whether this was a technocrat government or a government that was manipulated by the political forces, and then they pulled back. So with the big tent approach, you have to have people who are members of the sectarian political parties, who are secular, who are neither. And when I say I worry about the other universities, we actually could not have afforded in Lebanon to have a strategy and an outcome in which AUB did great, but LAU and University of Saint Joseph were broken by the economic process. We're much more interlinked and interdependent than people realize. So going from that perspective, our responsibility is to educate tomorrow's citizen and to explain to that young person who's coming in with a relatively narrow definition of citizenship, the majority of which is almost certainly not their national citizenship, right? It's can be political, it can be sectarian. That's normal, you know? So many people have written about the fact, eloquently, Amartya Sen, although I recommend his YouTube and not his book, says the same thing in his book 100 different ways, but it's the same thing, which is that we're all complex composites of different parts of who we are. And the university needs to let that debate breathe. Today's Lebanon, tomorrow's Palestine and Jordan and Iraq is going to have to come to terms that religious or sectarian identity is deeply ingrained. That's okay. America accepted that a long time ago. You're a Catholic Italian American. You are a Pakistani Muslim American. That's part of your identity. And I think it's very important that we push this envelope and that we not lose the credibility by hiding behind what many US universities love to say, well, we graduate leaders. Well, you know, the problem with Lebanon, you have 6 million people, and if every one of them wants to be a leader, well, who are the followers? You know, who does the work? You know, thank God I have a team that's almost universally better than me, so work gets done. So this brings me to a point that Lisa brought up, which is very provocative, is that all of us were educated in an era where the university president was a leader, was a role model. I mean, for me, Kingman Brewster, Clark Kerr, they were exceptionally good leaders, but they weren't exceptions in how they viewed their position. You know, you brought up Ruth Simmons. I would argue she's the exception since Derek Bog stepped away of a public-facing university president or rector. In addition to everything else we do, if I'm not a public-facing rector, if Ahmed Dalal is not a public-facing rector, if Joe Jabra or Michel, they're not public-facing rectors who get to know the students and their concerns, I can't get away with that. Even if everything else, we tick every other box, the finances are good, we're recruiting well. So this is where I emerge with our saying, we're in a period where we need to worry more about the health and well-being of our sister institutions and embrace the competition as something normal in the price of doing business. I think there is a unique opportunity in the Arab world, given the failure of the national projects everywhere. I mean, there's a failure to build nation states, right? I mean, you're the expert, so. So is to go back, not so much to the drawing board, but to focus on the citizenship project. And that's what I talked about in my opening day remarks this year, is that we need to take this very seriously all the way into K through 12 education. We can't just wait to get an 18 or 24-year-old and say, now you learn how to be a citizen. So that's an enhanced role of the universities, is to be in the schools, in the schools.
Thank you, Fadlu. Ed, we're going to shift gears, with you at least, on U.S. foreign policy. Obviously, these were all private universities founded years ago by zealot missionaries and having maybe different goals at the time, but they really are in the firmament of U.S. higher education, and they've also received and they continue to receive support from the U.S., at least partly. From the work that you do in Washington, obviously, how do you see these educational institutions, particularly in the three that we're talking about, but if there's any other examples as well, how does that fit into how Congress thinks about U.S. interests, U.S. foreign policy, or how administrations deal with it? Where does it rank? Just your thoughts about all of this.
Sure. Just one earlier point, talking about police on campus. As a child of the 60s, we were pretty used to that. Yeah, so let me quote Mike McCall, the chairman of Foreign Affairs Committee of the House. After our lobbyists and members met with him, he immediately reacted in a meeting and said, "Oh my God, this is the best soft power tool that we could have, and I'm going to go talk to the appropriation staff." Mike is a conservative from Texas, Republican. He's not doing this because he's got a big heart and wants to spend money. He's doing this because he sees it in the U.S. interest. And I think that's the way your representatives here are making that case. And also, it's a spread of American values in a way. American values are very important, this liberal education process, preparing students as leaders in the region and in the world. Fudlo mentioned earlier and Lisa, how many different people have reached, presidencies, prime ministers, owning their own businesses, et cetera. What better influence do we have, and especially when China's investing so much? So the way I see it is, it's in our interest to promote our values. The last 2 years, thanks to the good work of the universities, they got $85 million. That's not chicken feed. Of course, we'd like to do better, and we have to crack the whip on the lobbyists, but it's been, I think, a very good showing for America's interest in those universities. With a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and shout out to the lobbyists who work very, very hard for LAU, AUB, maybe AUC as well, making a lot of headway in a difficult time in the U.S. In general. I've often, when you look at U.S. involvement in the Middle East, I wish they would drop as many universities on the region as they've dropped other military equipment. And if you look at the money spent, between military and education, it is. You said it's not chicken feed, but it's peanuts. But here we are. I mean, here we are. Lisa, let me go to you. Completely different question. Universities were or are kind of originally medieval roots, whether it's in Europe or in the Muslim world, in Baghdad or in Andalusia or otherwise. And here we are in the middle of the third decade of the 21st century. Technology, students are online, everything's available, to say nothing of the oncoming AI and the way the world is tremendously changing, especially for young people. Maybe we're still a bit old school and we get physical books and all of that. Maybe this is more from your perch at Columbia, one of the leading American universities. How is that shaking or challenging or transforming how a university like Columbia plans for 2035, 2040 in this world that is changing so fundamentally?
Well, I actually think we may, and I think Fudlo would agree with what I'm about to say, but he can speak for himself. I actually think we're at a kind of interesting inflection point because it's kind of back to basics now. A lot of the bells and whistles that we were accustomed to for the last couple of decades, when you thought about what universities were doing, they were going to do technology transfer offices, and they were going to do new student dorms, and they were going to do athletic facilities, and so forth and so on. The teaching and learning part kind of didn't become so, and that's been exhibited in the sort of who cares about humanities and social sciences, it's all STEM, it's all job readiness, and so forth and so on. At this point, to prepare somebody for that kind of world, which none of us understand, is going to require a back to, let's do a little bit of thinking. How do you think systematically? Actually, it's by arguing with Thomas Aquinas, right? So I do think we're going to see a shift in a kind of recommitment to humanities and social sciences as a way of preparing people for a world that we can't really map out particularly effectively. And to me, obviously, I think that's what we ought to have been doing all this time anyway. But insofar as we did lose focus, now is a good time. And I do see this in the way a lot of the sort of higher ed people are thinking about what they're going to, you can't anticipate how AI is going to reshape these institutions. You can anticipate that people are going to have to be good critical thinkers. How do you help them do that? It's back to these kinds of, this is what education is. So I think, however we do it, we will be encouraging curiosity, encouraging sort of systematic thinking, so forth and so on. That can happen in any field, but increasingly I think we're going to say, you know what, that is what the humanities help people do. And they have a historical perspective that way and so forth. So I'm actually oddly optimistic because I do think this sort of collective crisis is either you go back to basics or you will have lost to AI. They can do this sort of stuff better than we can.
Very interesting. Yeah, in a time of great change, go back to basics, get that stability. Fadlo, kind of the same question, maybe from your perch. Part of it is content, fundamentals, Thomas Aquinas, critical thinking, and all of that. Part of it is also, in a sense, the technique of having a university. A person standing in a classroom, and the nature of teaching. Or lab work and so on with all the new technologies. How is that already affecting AUB? How are you thinking of it? And relating to that, the students that are at AUB or LAU or AUC, they're going to live in the 2030s, 2040s, and 2050s. And you as a president must always be looking forward, looking to the future. How does all of that affect your leadership and your priorities at AUB?
I think I've spoken frequently of my admiration for the founders of AUB, the first three presidents in particular. They're always open to the currency of change, Paula. And I agree with Lisa. I think this is a very exciting time in pedagogy, in what we teach and how we teach it. AI is a transformative tool. And the history of AUB has been to embrace change. It's had to embrace change. I'm confident that change will eventually be to the benefit of the students. That doesn't say it's going to be easy. I mean, at AUB, like every university in the world, you have faculty who give the same lectures, the same exams, the way they did in the good old days, and assume it's the best way to instruct. I'm not even sure of the worth of the exam other than as a learning assessment tool that needs to be much less punitive and stress-inducing. However, I'm not willing to throw it out completely without some data as to what's next. Is it group learning? Is it experiential learning? So I think it's an extremely exciting time. I do believe that the students are a bit ahead of us now. We need to catch up. If we don't catch up, then we shouldn't take comfort, as some educators did when, these technology companies from San Diego and elsewhere failed to raise kids' SAT scores. That was the alpha test. The beta and gamma tests look a lot better, okay? So in addition to launching an online learning platform, we are trying to integrate experiential learning, distant learning, into the basic curriculum. But it always goes back to, what are you really teaching kids? And I recall the last time I spoke to Malcolm Kerr, I loved and admired as a human being. The administration of AUB, what he was called into at that time, did not play to his strengths. I'm just being very frank. But Malcolm, the last time I saw him, 3 days before he was killed, my father was passing by and said, "You want to come see him? He likes you. You like him?" I said, "Sure." And I got on a plane the day he was assassinated. And what I talked to him about for about 15, 20 minutes is how much I enjoyed Shakespeare's histories and tragedies, how much I enjoyed Greek history. I was obviously going to medical school because no one else in my generation of the Khouris would ever sniff a stethoscope. So that was kind of a sign. You know, what do I get for my Christmas present? A stethoscope. What do I get for my birthday? A microscope. It's like, okay. Yeah, I got the message. The message received. And somehow my father got everyone else on my mother's side of the family to come in on the plot. But Malcolm made a very good point. The best physician is a humanist. And I would say it's true for the best engineer, the best sociologist, the best historian, the best diplomat, the best politician. But that's not enough. It's how we teach them to capture these kids, and whether we teach them by putting on AI-driven plays, whether we let them write the plays or write the history. The one thing is clear: it would be idiotic to say, well, you can't use ChatGPT to do an assignment. You know, I've recently thought with my speeches, since I still foolishly write them myself, to end by saying this speech was not written by ChatGPT. Your technologically challenged president. Yeah, ChatGPT might make it better. But I do think there is so much that's appealing. I mean, Lisa nailed it in the basics, that we have to get that across to the students using the much better tools.
Very heartening to hear. In a few minutes, I want to turn over to you, so your thoughts, your questions. But let me sort of end this round, Fadlo, with you. You are here in the U.S. You were in California and other places. Give us a sense of, you know, as a leader of one of these universities today, when you come to the U.S., what is the nature of your engagement? What are you looking for? Obviously, you're in Washington as well, where the government resides, but you were in other capitals as well. What is the relationship either with alumni or, I don't know, Lebanese Americans, U.S. government? What's your menu like when you're in the U.S.?
So, you know, I mean, Lebanon is not the safest country in the world, Paul. And I think we keep the university safe by being clear about what we're doing and why we're doing. And I try to bring that same message here to the U.S. I think one of the things that keeps us safe in a more dangerous world, I mean, America is much more dangerous than the America several of us grew up in the 60s or 70s. Everybody has a gun. I made a joke to a woman about her MAGA hat, and my wife was worried she'd pull a gun. So this is the kind of thing you have to think about today. But and I still recommend using humor, but maybe more wisely than I do. But in this world, what I need to do is to make sure that our alumni, Lebanese Americans, Arab Americans, our friends, our folks on faculties and in industry, young and old, feel connected to the university and know what we're doing. I've always said surprises are great for anniversaries and birthdays, but for nothing else. So if anything, I try to over-communicate and then see people when I'm here. I am also trying not to get the board irritated enough that they'll tell me to park somewhere else. I mean, but part of it is to be very consistent in our messages. You know, I think Jay and Ed know this very well. When I go in asking for funds from the U.S. government, I'm always asking for AUB and LAU. Jay does the same when he goes with Michel Mawad. If it's a non-Lebanon funding, we say AUB, LAU, AUC. It's critical to keep that in front of the friends that we have in Congress. And I completely agree with Ed. It's not that they're looking to write an extra check. They're weighing, with a tight budget, with a bunch of interesting people from all sides who are making it difficult to pass any legislation, how important is this? How good a return on investment this is? So there you're making the case that you are offering something unique and uniquely American, okay?
Yes.
The way we educate is very different even than the way the Brits educate. It's a very different educational system. They're very different values. I'm not saying they're incompatible, right? They are compatible. But it is a different approach. And to keep that in front of the people who care, particularly the youngest generation, I always like to see our youngest alumni as well, is critical, to let them feel connected to something larger, sustainable, that's not just looking to get a check and a nice note in exchange for Christmas.
Thank you, Fadlo. Let me turn to the audience. Yes, there's a microphone. Raise your hand so the microphone finds you. Introduce your good self
Hi.
and ask your question.
Okay. Tanya Rahal. I'm a co-founder of the ATFL with Peter Tanis, and I am currently representing Notre Dame University. So I hope to be working with Jennifer and Jay and get in on some of that action. And so that kind of leads me to, because no one's clearly answered this question yet today, but given that the schools, what we call the ASHA schools, AUB, LAU, AUC, and maybe a couple, IC, International College, how does an institution become an ASHA school, if you happen to know that?
Forgive my lack of tact.
And I
because
have a second part.
Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe
You
we'll
might
take a
not-
few questions and then
Yeah,
we'll come
yeah,
back.
yeah,
I'll
okay.
make notes. Tanya, go ahead.
Oh, okay. And so, as a follow-up to that question also, I represented the government of Qatar. They were very effective, and it wasn't my work, but in establishing branches of American schools. And that seems to be a trend that's starting now with other schools wanting to do that, branches of American schools on campus there.
Thanks, Tanya. Let's take another question. Yes, well, the gentleman right there.
Thank you very much. This was a fascinating exchange. My name is Nadim Khouri, no relation. I'd like to go back to the question that was posed by Dr. Salim, which is on the global side. The global side was affected positively by AUB in history. We at AUB had 5 signatories of the UN Charter, 18 government representatives. And my impression is that this is the type of specificity that is needed. What are we doing on the global side? Right now, on the peace side, there's a lot of discussion on the sustainability, environmental and others. My impression is that there is a very important role for the 3 universities, all universities. I'd like to hear if we can have any
Thank you.
details from you.
Thank you, Nadim. One question for this round on that side.
Hello, my name is Saadi Othman, and I work for a company called SOS International. I have a question that is related to the current situation in the Middle East and the war in Gaza and the impact, that it's having probably on your students and in all of your colleges. The nature of my job takes me quite a bit for the last 20 years with this company and before with the DOD and with the State Department to the Middle East. So I am in close touch with a lot of folks in the Middle East, throughout the Middle East, in many countries. Some of them are just average citizens, some of them are intellectuals, some of them are business leaders, and some of them are government leaders. And since the war in Gaza, I only traveled twice because of the State Department restrictions to countries like Iraq and Lebanon, and actually throughout the Middle East. I've been hearing quite a bit. There's always been anger, directed at the United States for many years because of the Middle East conflict. But I have noticed since the war in Gaza that this anger is turning into a serious, serious outrage, not only at the Israeli government, but also at the US government. And I even hear that from colleagues, former colleagues who are American diplomats in the Middle East. And it worries me a lot. I hear
yeah.
from, it's
And how it might affect.
is it impacting, how is it impacting your students? Are they very angry? Are they outraged? And are they becoming more anti-American than they used to be, if they used to be?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, when my dad was at AUB, the students took over AUB because they were angry at the U.S. back in the early
74.
70s. Anger at the U.S. is high, but it's not new. Fadlo, maybe I'll start with you. There were a number of questions, one on NDU, Asha, branches, global impact, anger at US.
Sure. So, I mean, the NDU question, just to be very candid, NDU is a parochial school. It's not an American university. It's a parochial school with accreditation. And it is deserving of support in certain areas, but you need to be very, very careful with the legislators, because being a religious-oriented school that's not an American university, there are funds to help such schools, Christian, Muslim, everything around the world. But the last thing you want to do is to have the legislators feel that you misrepresented it. So my advice for NDU, which was the beneficiary of some money that frankly I don't know how that happened, is just to be very straightforward about how you're serving the mission and how you can impact students with an American-style education. As to the proliferation of universities that are American but have branch campuses in the Middle East, it has a mixed track record so far. So my candid assessment is NYU, where John Sexton and Marriott Westerman, the current president, really put a lot of sweat equity into building relationships with the ruler of Abu Dhabi, and were very clear about what they wanted. That's been something of a success. They have 2,500 or so students, excellent students, more competitive students by GPA than the ones they have here at their much larger campus, but it's a free education. If I could offer a free education to my students, just similar to what Ruth Godesman just did for Montefiore and Einstein Medical School, they're going to now do what NYU Medical School did. NYU Medical School was a top 25 medical school. They made tuition free. They're competitive with Harvard, Columbia, and Hopkins now. Okay, so the issue here is the track record. We know Texas A&M is closing in Qatar. You're right, Qatar have been very effective, but Qatar are incredibly generous. One would argue they are the most generous of the Gulf countries per capita. They help Lebanon, they help their students, but they're starting to look at what's the long-term win with this. And that's why you're seeing some of their universities, I think, becoming less well-defined in their national agenda, whereas I think everything I've seen from the Emirates suggests that NYU Abu Dhabi could be a fairly rare success for that.
Well, Fadlo, on the question of branches,
Yeah.
AUB's
Opening a branch in yeah.
Cyprus. LAU was considering something in Iraq, I think. What's AUB's thinking of its own branches?
So, I mean, this is the risk-reward thing. NYU, Texas A&M, Cornell, Georgetown, Northwestern, if they fail there or in Shanghai, it's not catastrophic. Cyprus and the Gulf are our backyard. So if we fail, the reputational damage is much higher for us or an AUC or an LAU. So Cyprus was very carefully studied, as you know, Paul. It was we did an extensive internal report. We had the Albright-Stonebridge group do an independent review. We had another group do a review. And our feeling is very clearly that there are probably, by our data, 50% more students that would like to go to AUB, but are afraid of being in Lebanon. And so those were AUB students in all but location. We decided that it made sense to build the campus as close as possible, and that was Paphos, with tremendous support from the Cypriot government and the municipality of Paphos, to grow it slowly, so it'll only ever be 2,000 to 2,500 students. The standards are the same. Some of the faculty, at least transiently, will be the same. And in the long run, that mobility will be an asset to us, to have kids from the AUB Mediterraneo campus in Paphos go over to Beirut and vice versa. Student mobility is a plus. Plus, for the besieged Lebanese faculty who have seen the value of their savings vanish, but also the quality of travel and opportunity their passport provides them, and entry into the EU is critical for retention. So that's that perspective. We've studied it in the Arab countries. It's a more complex situation. No question, academic freedom in Cyprus, as long as you don't praise Ataturk or Erdogan, you're good.
You're fine.
Okay. I don't think I'm going to be praising Erdogan. I have more positive views on Ataturk, but maybe I shouldn't even say that. But so for me, these are all steps to reinforce what the mothership can contribute. If not, if you're detracting from the mothership, it's you've screwed up royally, and you need to be canned. So I don't think our analysis suggests that. Very briefly, because I don't want to eat up my far more intelligent panelists and restrained panelists' answers. Yes, we would love to be leading a charter of something, and Gaza offers an opportunity, and I'll talk about that before I mention anger. So AUB is helping lead a study, discussions about how we rebuild the health sector in Gaza and the education sector. And we're doing it mostly Jordanian and Palestinian and increasingly Egyptian universities. We would like to bring in our sister universities, bring in the Lebanese university, because, for example, for a medical student in Gaza to not lose a year, we offer American-style medical education, as does LAU. These kids are being educated in the British and European style. So they would be better off studying at the Lebanese university or one of the Jordanian 6 or 7 years. Nursing we can take. Public health, yes. But how do we preserve it so that people, rather than feel frustrated and angry and full of fury, feel that they're contributing? One of the major drivers of depression is a sense of what they called learned helplessness. And our students are not helpless. So we're wrapping up Palestine Week on campus. That's what our students and faculty have set up. And I think the discourse is very different than what you hear at American universities, where I think the students, I don't want to say they're angrier, but here they are expressing their anger by protesting. Our students express their anger by creating projects and building coalitions. And it's a funny thing to say about students in Lebanon, as frustrating as that may be, but they don't feel as unempowered, sadly, as some of the students I know from our alma mater at Columbia are feeling they're being silenced. Our students wake up in the morning thinking of new insults they can toss my way, and so they're quite creative. And they're great, but they don't feel unempowered. That's when you know you're failing.
Thank you, Fadlu. Lisa, your thoughts on any of these? Global impact, anger at America?
Well, let me just, I think one of the ways to think about how you position an American university and so forth is not so much, it is partly American soft power and so forth, but it's also a model of education. This liberal arts model is uniquely American, and it has contributed to the influence of America in the world because it has produced generation after generation of people who are, I often say what a liberal arts education is sort of cross-training for the mind. You are equipped thereby to do all sorts of different things. And that, in my view, has contributed to why the United States is and continues to be a source of innovation and intelligence and, interest and power. So you don't have to be with a particular American administration to admire this model of education. And I think, it's true everybody is mad right now, but honestly, the United States was not in good odor during the Egyptian Revolution. Either one of them probably, but the most, the United States, so I think the fact that the American government policy is not popular in the region is probably often the case. This kind of education, however, remains remarkably powerful. So that's how I would think about this. And then I also, on sort of branch campuses and so forth, I think the branch campus experiment's been pretty interesting. I think you may be a little more sanguine about NYU than I am, but basically I respect the kind of inventiveness and experiments and so forth and so on. What I think is actually, in a way, more interesting is this increasing effort, and now I'm seeing it in South Asia. So this is from Pakistan. I'm involved in a university that's setting up an arts and sciences program. And pick it up. It's just what you do at AUB. It's just what you do at AUC, and they're going to see if they can do it in Karachi. That, I think, is part of the power of this sort of model. It's less about what the name of the institution is, and more about this respect for a way of thinking about education that, is just, I'll go to my grave. I think it works, and I think it works wherever it is. So I'm very enthusiastic about people, picking this up and trying it, and being able to say, and one of the things you can do as a liberal arts graduate is say, I disagree with my government. So you can, even in the experience of saying, I'm going to an American-style school, even though I'm disagreeing with the American government, we do that all the time. That's part of what the education actually stands for. So anyway.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, let me ask about, on AUC, about branches. As you said, AUC is in a country of 100 now, 105, 110. Some of the Lebanese universities, LAU has 2 campuses in Lebanon. Balamand University established a few branches in the country. And Egypt, God knows, is an enormous place. Has AUC thought of in the past, or,
They have a new Cairo campus and a downtown
That's true.
Cairo
You have
campus.
the downtown, that's true. There is that.
That's about as far. No, I don't. I mean, I think the outreach within Egypt has been
You talked
through
about
this
working with
collaboration
universities.
and so forth and so on. It doesn't actually, it wouldn't make a great deal of sense for AUC not to take advantage of the partnership opportunities
Work
there
with
are.
universities, yeah. Ed, over to you, whether it's LAU and its branches in the country or outside of the country,
Well, I think,
or other points you want.
Yeah, there were, getting back to Fudlo and Lisa's points about being a global citizen, training people for, beyond the country that the student is in. I think that's part of what's going on with these branches. LAU sees a need to really reach out to the Arabs in the region. There's also, an examination of where to go and how to do it. And so they picked Iraq right now. But I think they have a commitment to reaching out to Arabs across the region, not just to Lebanese. If I can, I just want to respond to a couple of these points. Tanya, I'm glad you raised that question. I think that Jay and Jennifer can give you some specifics, but I want to point out for the audience that there's a difference between an American school and American-styled education. LAU and AUB, AUC, I'm getting a yes, are American schools. And they have the Socratic educational model, which I think is very important in terms of how the U.S. government analyzes this stuff. So just to bring those out, they can get into ASHA and these other things for you. To speak to Gaza. Unfortunately, I think for Lebanon, all roads lead through Gaza. Lebanon's instability today, we'd like to think can get fixed separately from the problem that's going on in Gaza. It may be, President Biden has put a big emphasis on Lebanon. He has a special envoy that's dealing with the border issues. But both sides seem to think that they can't begin this process until there's peace. We'll see if that'll change. So it really takes us back to Gaza, and I think there's a lot of disruption and a lot of instability and a lot of worry. And think of it if Israel goes north with the same kind of effort that they put into Gaza. It could be very scary. But having said that, so yeah, there's a lot more instability. I think there's a bigger problem, and we have to be concerned beyond Lebanon, because this is a Gaza problem. It's an Iranian problem. There's so many things that we've got to deal with. But Fudlo told me last week, and it's true for LAU too, they have their highest enrollment ever. So something's working. There's some good hope there. And that really takes us back to, I think, the importance of the American schools and how these citizens and their parents admire the American education. So I think that there's a lot of room for more growth for American education. Unfortunately, in Lebanon, I think there's a lot of other questions to fix Lebanon, not only in Gaza, because of Gaza, but because of corruption in Lebanon that has to be fixed along with it.
Thank you, Ed. We're almost out of time, but we did start a bit late, so quick comments or questions, and then we'll close.
Hi, thank you for a great session. Ronnie Hamad. I wanted to ask about, you talked a little bit about this effort that AUB is doing with schools 0 to 12th grade. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, and maybe all of you, in terms of how you're promoting and educating or supporting schools in citizenship, social justice, improving pedagogy. Obviously in the state in Lebanon, the government's collapsed, the budget's almost non-existent now, and so the school system is in dire straits. And so what efforts are being made to really help support those schools in this effort?
Thank you, Ronnie.
So,
One question from the back, 2 questions from the back. Those will be the final 2.
This is more of a thought maybe than a question. I'm Susie Dietrich. I'm organization development practitioner and working with government for a long time, now retired, and the spouse of Bill Hoffman, who brought me into this wonderful family. Just a thought around what the American universities, what the 3 universities are doing with building connections between people, kids who have come up with different ways of thinking and different channels of beliefs, and helping them build that support for diversity of opinion, and realizing that it's really essential. I'm thinking about the authoritarian followers that we have here in the U.S. and the challenges we have with kids who've been raised by authoritarian followers coming into university, into high schools with blinders on. And I wonder if there's a way, and maybe you're already doing this, so one of the only ways that I've learned to help shift authoritarian followers into a more critical ways of thinking is to partner them up with people who have different ways of thinking and build friendships and relationships. And through that way, they realize that that person or that group is not a stereotype. I wonder if there's any ways that the students, as they're doing maybe sort of the entry-level classes in the U.S. and in our institutions, could build up little cohorts, or we've got Zoom and all of that now, of building ways to learn from each other.
Thank you. Great question. Thanks, Susie. Lady in the back, final question.
Hi, thank you so much for talking. My name is Halu Jabran. I just had a question about accessibility, and I suppose the question is, Dr. Anderson spoke very critically about institutions becoming very business-like. So as we look at global citizenship and institutions as an avenue for success in critical thinking, how are we making those more accessible as opposed to financial institutions?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe Lisa, we'll start with you and go in a different order of business. Also, any last remarks you'd like? This is your last chance to throw out your words of wisdom there. Yes. So.
On thinking about K through 12, obviously, the more you invest in K through 12, the better your applicants and so forth and so on. So there is a logic to that. In the case of AUC, we have 7,000 students at AUC, give or take a few, and there are millions of K through 12 students in Egypt. So it's sort of, the scale issue is a real challenge. And that's not unique to this domain, but it's well illustrated there. So the only thing that has, this is, the previous minister of education in Egypt was an AUC person he had been dean of engineering, went off to be and so forth. I don't think he would describe his tenure as having been an unvarnished success, because the education system for K through 12 in Egypt is such a catastrophe. It's very hard to think about how you would. So he did make some significant impact, I think, but it's going to take generations to fix that. So, but when AUC thinks about doing something like that, you know, we did several times, including during my tenure, toy with the School of Education or a Faculty of Education or something like that, and you know, again, the scale kinds of things, unless we're talking to the policymaker, and in a place like Egypt, you produce the policymaker rather than produce the policy papers for the policymaker, as it were. So I do think it's a significant problem and issue, and I don't know that there's a particular, certainly AUC has not figured out a way to have more of an impact than that. Now, that's not nothing. One of the things that is a matter of considerable pride of mine is during the, you know, when I left the presidency of AUC, one of my colleagues said at one of the retirement events that that I had been the first, and he hoped last, president of the university to serve under 4 different presidents of the republic. All of those
That problem has been solved, by the way.
What? Yes, exactly. Exactly. It had been not a problem before.
No problem.
But the reason I raise it is, in every single cabinet of those 4 different presidents were AUC alumni. So, you know, it's a different way of thinking about how can you, you know, and so forth. I'm not sure any of those alumni would say their tenure was unvarnished success either, but, you know, you do sort of say, this is how we have access to the policy circles, and we should recognize that, we should take advantage of it, and so forth. So, on diversity of opinion, I actually think, you know, again, AUC has a different, you know, virtually everyone at AUC is Egyptian. And Egyptians are a remarkably homogeneous. One of the things that's fun, actually, about collaborations that AUC has with some medical research and so forth and so on is how homogeneous the gene pool is. So literally homogeneous. That said, there's huge variation in inequality. I mean, it is just staggering at this point. So one of the things, AUC is this, you know, obviously elite institution, has a very important program to bring students from all of the governorates and from public schools and so forth and so on. You throw them into that environment, it's terrifying and difficult and so forth and so on. So there are the equivalent of freshman seminars and all sorts of things like that. But that is a challenge, and it remains a challenge for the entire time the students are there. We had a perverse moment. There's the students themselves tend to congregate with like students, which students usually often do anyway. So there's a part of the campus that's called the Gucci Corner. So I thought we should go to Gucci and have it named, right? If we're going to call it that. So yes, but you can obviously have curricular and co-curricular programs that acknowledge that this is important and a challenge. So I think there are ways for all of us to be thinking about that. Depending on your community, the cleavages will be different, but they're always there. And part of the point of these kinds of institutions is to bring people together that wouldn't otherwise be there.
Thanks, Lisa. Ed, I'm going to go to you. We'll close with Fadlo.
Okay, sure.
I mean, K through 12 question, and maybe in that area there are American schools abroad, and how does that fit into U.S. aid and so on?
So let me address these questions. I'm the chairman emeritus for almost 20 years now of 3 American schools in Morocco. We get 0 help from the United States government, unless there are American diplomats going to that school. Otherwise, forget it. Not Americans, American diplomats. So, and they have a policy at the State Department that says no more new American schools. That's not good, because we do need feeders. These kids are going through these schools, and they've got university opportunities, whether it's AUC, LAU, AUB, America, maybe Europe. But they come up through that American liberal education framework and that Socratic way of model of educating, where there's interaction between, the teacher and the student. So I think those are really important, and it's something we've got to lobby for because I think it really builds the enrollment potential. Secondly, I don't know if I'm going to totally address what you said, but you reminded me to also say, in terms of really reaching out beyond those who can afford an education, there are programs that the United States are funding to bring students in from MENA, Palestine, Syrian refugees. This is all really good stuff. And let me also tell you, LAU has more than 50% of its students, I know AUB does too, on scholarship. AUB will give a scholarship before they'll say no to a qualified student. Did I say AUB? I should have said LAU. But he shook his head yes. And so I think those are just important points to bring out to you. Just to close, I wanted to quote Ronald Reagan. It seems like he's being quoted the last couple of days. He said America was that shining city on the hill. I just can't help but think that these American schools are those shining institution on the Middle East Hill. And we've talked today about what they represent, where they can go, and how to really message in America for them. So I applaud you for this panel.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Thank you for being on it. Fadlo, you have many last words.
Sure, I'll try to be efficient. So I would say that when I started my inauguration, I charged us with being more economically diverse and intellectually elite than we were economically elite and intellectually diverse. And I think we've accomplished that. 65% of our students get financial aid at 55% on average, and another 22% are learning for free. So I mean, in the last few years, we need to push up that 12 or 13 or 15% to 25% to our full pay, because it's not sustainable. We've also built platforms for availability. We have an availability office. So if you have a learning disability or a physical disability, you are accommodated. And if the professor doesn't accommodate you, then the water that the professor in is a hell of a lot hotter than the water that the student is in. And it has teeth. So I think that's very important, not just to be compliant, but to be appropriate, right? To do the right thing. With regard to Susie's point, yeah, I think this is AUB's secret sauce, right? We overcome fear of the other better than any of the institutions I've ever been at. My first year, the students wanted to redo the election platform. And so over Christmas, I assigned a student from the most powerful theocratic group in Lebanon, also the most powerful armed group, or at least a fan of theirs.
Who are we talking about?
I'm wondering here. And a student who is secular, and I'm pretty sure she was close to atheist, right? To work together to come up with new electoral laws, and they did it. And those laws are proportionate representation, and they've held till today. And the students both told me how it was one of the best experiences they had at AUB. That opportunity to see people as closer to you than you thought is the best formula for overcoming it. But it does start K through 12. And I'll tell you what we're doing tangibly at K through 12 and try to tie the strings, the loose ends. So we have a wonderful Department of Education. I'd like it eventually to be an institute or a school of education. They have programs in 9 countries. It's called Tamam. It's an Arabic-based, stakeholder-based Arabic language curricular development, and it's K through 12. They're in, and I'm going to get some of the countries wrong, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, Egypt, Yemen, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. I'm missing one. I said Jordan. I think Iraq. Okay. So this brings the parents and the teachers together, rather than making learning Arabic, which is a wonderful language, but Paul and I went to the same school a couple of years apart. They bludgeoned you with Arabic rather than make you love the language. And then we get to The next to last year you learned Arabic, we had Alfred Khouri, and he made us love the language, and you're saying, what was wrong with the rest of these guys? So to make people embrace it early. But in today's Lebanon, that's not enough, because in addition to everything else, we haven't talked about the pandemic. The pandemic cost kids, on average, 2+ years of school. And who felt it the worst? The kids in the public school, the kids that you guys get, Tanya, right? And that we get and that everyone gets. So how do you overcome that? One, well, you can develop what we have as a foundations program at AUB, so people can go spend a semester, a year, so they don't join the rest of the students, and then they feel less than others because they're so far behind in math and science and Arabic and English. But it's to be very candid that we want to impact the curriculum in Lebanon, K through 12. And I have to say, this Minister of Education has been happy for us to partner with him. No one's perfect, but he basically is bringing in the universities. Not all the experiments have worked, you know. He got together a group of experts. There were no math and science experts, and they decided that religion should be mandatory and science should be optional. So back to the drawing board on that. Yeah, I mean, life is stranger than fiction. But the good thing is they recognize this, that, look, the one thing that they can agree on even less than who should be president in Lebanon is religion. So maybe religion should be optional and science should be mandatory. Having said that, I think in this era, it's not just the 3 universities that are represented here, but in the long run, you know, Columbia has a lab school, Chicago has a lab school. We would love to have a lab school, but it's not enough. You have to get into public education at the governmental curriculum level. If we don't, then we're missing a tremendous opportunity to make this a better world for everyone. And for us, that's one of our core foci. How do we get in the weeds, even if we make mistakes, to produce a better curriculum for the students that we only have 3, 4, 7 years with? So that's where I think the real rubber hits the road.
Thank you, Fadlo. Before closing this panel, I want to turn to Amanda Fox from AUB to say a few words.
I think I can project.
Before, we're recording this, so if you would use a microphone.
Oh, okay, great. Yes, of course. Thank you. Sorry. I wanted to show off my projecting skills. I'm Amanda Fox, Director of Communications for AUB, and I, along with my colleague, Dr. Tanya Haddad, who couldn't be here today, who's the Director of the Global Engagement Initiative, wanted to thank you all so much for coming for the weekend. I hope you had some lunch. This event is part of our Global Engagement Initiative, or GEI, which is a program that focuses on fostering partnerships in order to combine knowledge, share, spread, and expand knowledge, which I definitely think we did here today in this fascinating discussion. So I want to thank our brilliant panelists, Dr. Khouri, Dr. Anderson, Ambassador Gabriel, Dr. Salem, for the discussion, and want to thank the team at MEI for helping us put the event together and for the support and partnership of ATFL, and of course our crew at AUB, including Dr. Haddad, without whom we couldn't do any of this. Please keep an eye out for an email about subsequent events, and please grab more food because we ordered way too much.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.